Konrad Graf has worked as a professional translator since 1998, translating Japanese into English primarily in the field of investment research, but it is for his extracurricular activities that we are truly honored to welcome him today. So Konrad Graf is the formulator of the action-based jurisprudence framework, which argues for new and more explicit applications of the action theory principles of Mises and Hopper within an integral approach to the foundations of legal philosophy. His work on action-based jurisprudence is an intellectual wonder, one that you cannot afford to miss reading. But he hasn't stopped there. He's written numerous articles on monetary theory and specifically Bitcoin. He has recently published a small treatise entitled On the Origins of Bitcoin, Stages of Monetary Evolution. This title is an homage to the 1982 classic On the Origins of Money by Karl Menger, the founding father of the Austrian School of Economics. So Konrad Graf, along the likes of Peter Serter, are on the cutting edge of the cryptocurrency monetary theory. And it is on this topic that we will be hearing his first talk today, entitled Bitcoin, Context and Overview. I have no reservations in ranking him as one of the top leaders in praxeological analysis, so would you please join me in welcoming him to the platform.
Thank you very much for the kind welcome. Understanding Bitcoin is a learning-intensive process, one that I have been engaged in for much of the past year. Not understanding Bitcoin is fairly simple and much easier. Nevertheless, today and tomorrow, I would like to offer some perspectives and approaches to understanding Bitcoin that have taken shape and stood out in my research so far. It is important to look from several different angles: practical, technical, economic, and historical. Tomorrow, I will focus on the technical and then the economic theory sides, including relevant contributions from Austrian greats Karl Menger and Ludwig von Mises. I begin today with some historical background that sets the stage for the arrival of Bitcoin. Precious metal coins once circulated as money. They were money in themselves. Pieces of paper and equivalent bank account entries are now money. A long process led from one to the other. The pieces of paper and account entries started out as substitutes that traded at fixed rates for precious metals. They were supposed to represent the metal units. However, after a centuries-long process, the links between metals and substitutes eroded until the last trace was gone in 1971. The paper and account entries continued, but were no longer money substitutes. They were fiat money. This history has many different stages and details, but still shows some overall patterns. The amount of metal that each unit of a given substitute could be exchanged for at a fixed rate steadily declined until it reached zero. The substitutes were redefined to equal less and less metal. Finally, when there was no link to metal at all, the purchasing power of each fiat unit could be freely inflated at will by creating new account entries and printing paper. In all cases, though, value gravitated toward the managers of the monetary system and away from most ordinary money users. These system managers at different stages of history can be roughly characterized as the state major banks alliance. This alliance seems focused on two things: using other people's money and going as far into debt as possible. The state part of this alliance uses these means to help expand its employments of young people in warring against other states and persons abroad and micromanaging the lives of innocent people at home. The major banks part of the alliance, whatever else is happening, seems content with just making a lot of money in the process. This duo has taken turns bailing out each other from the predictable results of their schemes for a long time. This is nothing new. The forms and methods have just been refined. As a culmination of this process, the full discretion to manipulate the aggregate stock of money is concentrated among appointees carefully screened and selected by the state and major banks alliance itself. This is not all bad, though. It is supposed to be good for ordinary money users. The alliance has always promised that in exchange for its great powers over money, it will provide a stable currency and will finally put an end to financial crises. Seems to struggle with that part. Many critics of pure fiat money propose to go back. Going all the way back would mean using precious metal coins directly in circulation. But this works best only in person and locally. The demand for greater convenience and longer distance transfers would remain strong. But so long as there are money substitutes, even modern digital grams linked to metal in a vault, the same temptations and risks that have played out throughout monetary history would still be present. The vulnerable links between metal and substitute could once again degrade, possibly leading back to the same result, fiat money. The root problem may be that using money substitutes relies on trusting third parties to honestly manage the relationship between commodities and substitutes and to conduct transfers over distances and in larger amounts. However, the historical record shows that such trust has always been violated, first a little and by a few, and later systematically by all and with official permission. But the main problems with both money substitutes and their fiat money descendants are still greater, as this modern analysis points out. The root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. Banks must be trusted to hold our money and transfer it electronically, but they lend it out in waves of credit bubbles with barely a fraction in reserve. We have to trust them with our privacy, trust them not to let identity thieves drain our accounts. This is how the problem was described in 2009 by the creator of Bitcoin, going by the chosen name Satoshi Nakamoto. Most of these problems also apply to historical money substitutes that were allegedly backed by metal. It is a difference of degree, not of kind. If the only significant way for people to store and transfer their wealth is to trust some third party for assistance, this sets up a high-risk potential failure point. Directly using metallic coins in person avoided this, but was limited in scope. Money substitutes and later fiat monies helped remedy some of these limitations, but created new risks and problems of their own. Would it be possible to create a new type of unit altogether, one that could avoid this interrelated complex of problems? It was into this historical impasse that Nakamoto launched Bitcoin in 2009. Bitcoin units avoid the drawbacks of metallic coins since they have no weight and can be transported instantly anywhere in the world at trivial cost. And in many ways, they are more convenient for users than traditional money substitutes and fiat monies, which were adopted due to their convenience. They are not subject to unpredictable inflation of units, and users do not have to rely on trusted third parties for transfers over distance or in larger amounts. Since Bitcoin solves so many of the problems inherent in all previous and existing monetary systems, it should be worth investigating more closely. Instead of looking closely, however, a more common response has been to look hardly at all and then dismiss Bitcoin or even warn that it must be a scam or a scheme. But one of the telltale signs of a scam is that the more closely one looks, the more suspicious it appears. My experiences with learning about Bitcoin and learning from Bitcoin experts suggest exactly the opposite. The more carefully that people investigate, the more interested they seem to become. Some of those most impressed are experts in relevant specialized fields. Bitcoin should, for example, be differentiated from the many previous digital currency projects that did fail. As Nakamoto wrote in 2009, a lot of people automatically dismiss e-currency as a lost cause because of all the companies that failed since the 1990s. I hope it's obvious that it was only the centrally controlled nature of those systems that doomed them. I think this is the first time we're trying a decentralized, non-trust-based system. Bitcoin is many things, but it is not a company. It is also important to examine the history and current operation of Bitcoin separately from speculations about its future. Ludwig von Mises was especially strict in separating the three domains of history, abstract theory, and prediction. My focus in Bitcoin research is mainly on what is and what has been. This can be a challenge because people are naturally interested and curious about the future. Yet a clearer understanding of what is and what has been should also be of some use if one wants to turn to the challenge of looking ahead. My sense right now is that the most important questions about the future of Bitcoin are highly technical ones in cryptography and network design, and it is to the relevant details of those fields that those concerned might best direct their attentions. Speaking of the future, though, since I began investigating Bitcoin earlier this year, my science fiction reading has come to a halt. It has seemed at times as though a great science fiction story, instead of being turned into a book or a film, has simply been turned into a reality. I will therefore borrow science fiction grandmaster Arthur C. Clarke's 3 laws to help organize the rest of what follows today and tomorrow. Clarke's 3rd law is also the best known. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Tomorrow, we will talk about the advanced technology part more, but for today, I will leave some things to the imagination. Images can sometimes lead to a quicker initial grasp of what Bitcoin makes possible and can make understanding the technical details easier later on. So right now, with a phone or a computer, any Bitcoin user can transfer purchasing power directly to any other. It arrives instantly, the cost is trivial, and the actual good enters the direct possession of the receiver. Bitcoin is not a substitute for anything else. It, as a metal coin was, it is in itself the monetary good. Unlike a metallic coin, though, it can be teleported anywhere and divided up into tiny parts at will. For safekeeping against thieves, one can hide the same Bitcoin in several different places at the same time. Then, when one recovers it from one of those places, it also instantly disappears from all of the others. One can also take a Bitcoin apart in a different way into layers and hide each layer in a different place. Anyone who found only one of those layers couldn't do anything with them. Only one who could find all of the layers and put them all back together could spend any part of the coin. Compared to metal coins, such things might seem magical, but they are already possible today, and we will discover how tomorrow. There is no better way to get a sense of what Bitcoin makes possible than to choose and download some wallet software and just try it out with some small amounts. There are many options, many of which are open source and free of charge. Some promising initial applications for Bitcoin in the real world include payments and remittances. Few users of credit cards and PayPal understand that merchants pay high fees to accept such payments, several percentage points online and higher in restaurants. If a merchant's profit margin is 8% and the transaction fee is 4%, that's half their profit. Using Bitcoin eliminates this cost either nearly or entirely. Existing payment methods also enable chargeback fraud, in which buyers cancel payments after a good or service has been delivered, costing merchants a great deal of money every year. With Bitcoin, a user sends a unique signed transaction. It contains no information that can be used to create any other transaction. This push method is much more secure than conventional pull methods. With credit cards, the buyer has to give the seller all the information needed to extract the money. This information can be intercepted and used for fraud. Identity theft remains a major problem with credit cards, even after many years of work to remedy it. To visualize a push versus a pull transaction, compare handing money to a cashier at a shop versus handing your wallet to the cashier so that some of your money can be extracted for you. That's how credit cards work. Remittances are especially important to those who move from poorer to richer countries to work and send money to their families back home. The few companies that provide this service at all charge surprisingly high fees and have many limitations on timeframes, countries, and amounts. If those at both ends used Bitcoin directly, like email, all the hard-earned wealth sent would also arrive immediately and regardless of amount or destination. Direct use at both ends is not yet practical for many people in this situation, but some companies are working to offer lower-cost remittances using Bitcoin internally, while local monies come in and go out at each end. Direct donations to bloggers and dissidents can route around financial censorship and financial blockades of organizations that support dissidents and those willing to report on officially concealed crimes and abuses of power. The Bitcoin protocol also enables new online business models based on micropayments and other features, including built-in escrow and multi-signature transaction support. So if these Bitcoins can be so useful, where do they come from and how many are there? An analogy to metal mining is often used, but the particular ore at first seems strange and magical. The only source of Bitcoin ore is in the Bitcoin mine. All Bitcoin ore in the universe is in here. Anyone can mine any time, but finding new ore gets harder and harder. Half of all possible Bitcoins were mined by November 2012. About every 4 years, half of what remain are mined. There are only 21 million possible Bitcoin units. Each equals 100 million smaller units called satoshis. The media often report that the maximum production will be reached around the year 2140. However, not many people realize that the most important changes are set to happen within the next 10 years, when 90% of all Bitcoins will already have been mined. This rises to 98.4% by about 2030, not that far off. The annual rate of addition of new Bitcoins is about 13% right now, which means that Bitcoin's rising exchange rate is going against 13% new coin production. However, this is to fall to about 2% by 2021. The exchange rate is still quite volatile. As new people discover Bitcoin, there are media cycles, and the exchange rate goes up and then shifts again. This is the all-time price chart on the Mt. Gox exchange, viewed in a linear scale. Viewed this way, it looks rather extreme. But the interesting thing is that the linear scale tends to distort the reality when it's spread over very different amounts. It's a little bit like trying to learn the shape of Antarctica by looking at a flat world map. It's all spread out along the bottom there. If we switch to a log scale, it looks rather different. So Bitcoin, instead of moving on a scale that goes from 1 to 2 to 3, it's moving on a scale that goes from 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000 this week. This is the price history viewed year over year. Each line is 1 year. And there's a sloping trend within each year, even though the whole thing still looks a little rough. So every Bitcoin is assigned to one or more addresses. Addresses are managed in wallet files, or they can be created and printed out. Here is one image to get a quick sense of how a Bitcoin address works in a practical sense. Anyone can put coins in, but since this is a German piggy bank, it is indestructible, and only the person with the key can take them out. What seems to be in a Bitcoin wallet are the keys and the addresses and the Bitcoins. But tomorrow we'll see that the reality is a little bit different than that. One theoretical model I've found useful for thinking about Bitcoin is the idea of a unit system duality. A common critique of Bitcoin is that its units do not have any value when taken in consideration all by themselves. It is easy to hold up a metal coin and think that it does have some such value all by itself. However, the Austrian school has always emphasized that an economic good only has value in the eyes of acting people. Likewise, any monetary object can only function to the extent that users accept it in that role in a given context. In approaching any subject, one can choose to take a system or a unit perspective. For example, in studying a flock of birds, one can study either the flocking behavior or the individual birds. But to actually understand what's happening, one really has to study both and understand the interactions between the system and the units. With metallic coin monies, the units were more prominent, and the technical and social system aspects were easier to let fade into the background. With Bitcoin, the system aspects are more obvious and the units more obscure. To get a better sense of this, think of a landline telephone. What if we demanded of telephones that they must have some value all by themselves, even when disconnected from the telephone network? We could see the problem with this right away. A telephone is a kind of good that is only valuable within the context in which it is valuable. Ayn Rand often used the term context dropping, which seems to fit here. Arguing that Bitcoin ought to have some value outside of the precise context in which it is meaningful seems similar to requiring that telephones also be useful when disconnected. I think the best approach is to say that yes, Bitcoin is a system, and yes, it does have tradable units. So it's a little beginning of theoretical perspective, and tomorrow we'll turn to understanding how Bitcoin actually works, which I think very few people understand. And then building on that, we'll turn to the economic theory analysis of it in the tradition of the Austrian school. Thank you.